All right, welcome back to part two of the Liquid Meadow tutorial here with the particle effects in Houdini. So in our previous tutorial, I showed you guys how to basically set up the effect. It doesn't look very great yet. We just kind of instanced some stuff on there so we can see what it's doing, but the basis of the effect is done. So in this tutorial, we're going to learn how to use Redshift instances to put models onto each different particle to make it look really cool. It's kind of what we're doing now with these, but with the copy to points, it's pretty slow. It gets really heavy. Using Redshift instances is much faster. Your viewport performance will be better, and it'll render faster. So after we do that, we are also going to go over how to put some lights and animate a camera and render it all out. So without further ado, let's get started. So the first thing I want to do here is I actually want to add a collider. So right now I just have this giant square grid thing. So in my actual example that I showed you guys at the beginning, there is a tree stump in the middle there that everything's colliding with. So I'm going to add that in before we start instancing stuff to it. So let me go out here. So I've got my particle sim. Let me just create a new geonode, and we're going to call this tree stump collider. Okay, and I believe I downloaded this model from Megascans. I think it's their Nordic Forest collection. So it's an FBX. So I think I need to use an agent in order to bring that in. If you guys are watching this, by the way, and you're a Houdini user and you know a different, better way to bring in an FBX object without using an agent, please let me know in the comments. I usually bring in models like OBJs with a file, and for whatever reason, it doesn't really work with FBX files, which makes no sense to me. It should be able to bring in an FBX. I don't know why they don't allow you to do that, or maybe I'm just doing it wrong. But the only way that I've found to properly bring one in is using an agent. And you have to change the character rig input here to FBX and then find your file. So let's see. It's put it in. I know it's a model, but I put it in my textures under Megascans, under the assembly assets. And then I think it's this Nordic Forest. And then it's just the tree stump. And I'm going to use the 0 instead of the 5. If you're not familiar with Megascans, when you download models like this, they give you like 5 different models. The one with a 0 next to it is the highest detail, therefore the highest poly model. The one with the 5 is the lowest detail, lowest poly. So I'm going to bring in the 0, the highest poly one. Okay. Let me just put a little transform on here. And let's go up. And let me just run this a bit, so I can see the scale. And actually, let me do ghost other objects. So I think I want this tree stump to be much bigger, actually. So I will go, let's bring it up to like something like that. There, it's a little bigger. Okay, now one thing about this model is the bottom is totally open. So if I turn off ghosting, the bottom is just open, and that's not going to work as a collider. You need to have airtight geometry in order for particles in Houdini to collide with them. So the way I'm going to do this, it's really easy. Fortunately, Houdini has a really nice tool for this. It's called extrude volume. Extrude volume. And what it does is it just puts on a cap. Now there's no normals. So let me go. Let me put a null on each of these so we can see what we're doing here. So this one is just the extruded volume. Oops. Extruded volume. And this one should be the render. Actually, no, we want it to go into here. So this is what we'll be rendering. So I'm going to go render, and I'm going to put the control click there, and it'll always render that. And this one we'll call collider, because this is what we're actually going to use to collide with it. So turn this off so you can actually see. So this is what it's going to collide with. It's got this whole base on it, and you can adjust that here by bringing the base padding, or no, it's the depth here. So we can bring this up to be like, I don't know, -0.1, something like that. But doesn't matter. I'm going to leave it at -1 for now. It's cool. So we just care that it's filled. Great. Okay, so we've got that. Let me put this render flag back on by control clicking right there. All right, so if we go up, we now have our tree stump, and awesome. So how do we bring this in to our sim? So let's reset this here. Let's go into our particle sim, and let's do an object. Actually, we don't even need to do that. We can just go into the popnet, put down a static object, and put down a merge, and we'll merge this here, put the static object there, hit Shift R to reverse the inputs so that this one's left, because it's left affect right inputs. And then highlight your static object, go to your SOP path, and then we can find our, in our tree stump collider, we want the collider that we set up. Cool, so that brings it in. Let's see what that does. Let's see how that works. So it appears to be working. So you can see these things sort of colliding with it, sliding off the surface and everything. But it's kind of weird. They're like appearing there. And the reason for that is because if we turn this off, you can see that I'm spawning particles where the collider already exists. So if we go inside this, there's going to be particles. I guess it's not going to show you, but there's particles are sort of trying to be born inside of it and right up next to it. And it's kind of creating some confusion there. So what I'm going to have to do is delete the particles where the tree is to help tell it that is an empty space. So there's a few ways we could do this. The first way that I tried doing it, I tried using a pop kill. So it didn't work very well, and I'll show you. I'll just kind of explain why briefly. You can put a pop kill down, and you can do a bounding and put bounding object, and then you can just go to your collider, and that'll work. So it'll just kill everything in there, but it's still going to be constantly trying to birth things in there. It's just going to be killing it on every frame. And then things kind of, the way they're kind of stacking up on top of here is kind of weird. So I found a better way that worked for me. So what I did was I took my grid that's going into my popnet here, and instead of doing scatter onto surfaces, I just did all points. So if you do scatter onto surfaces, what it's doing is it's taking the grid, and then inside of the popnet, it's scattering points across there. But if we use all points, what it's going to do is it's going to take the points that you're feeding it from the outside here that you can define yourself, and it will then use those points instead. So what I'll have to do now is just put down a scatter like that, and I'm going to do like 19,000. Okay, so there's my points, and I want to put down a global seed. If I put $F, so what that's going to do, I'll show you right here. Now let's turn off relax iterations so that they're more random. Basically, every frame, it's going to randomize where those appear, so they never appear in the same place twice. So these are going to be the points that I'm going to spawn from now. So now let's go back in here and I can show you what this is doing. So we've changed it to all points. It should essentially give me the same thing I had as before. But that doesn't fix our problem with the tree collider. But let me show you the reason I'm doing that up here is so that I can do this. So do an object merge. And I want to find my collider again. So here it is. Great. And I want to group based on bounding regions. So let's do a bounding object, and the object goes into this second thing. So that'll be our tree. I of course need to set this to points so you can actually see. So basically anywhere inside of this tree is going to be our group, right? And then what I'll do, I'll just name this delete. And then I'll put down a delete node. And we're going to go delete points. And the points we're going to delete are the delete points. So if I highlight this, there, now we just have an empty hole where the tree was. So now the points are never going to even try to spawn there in the first place, which is great. One other thing I did that really helped me is this is basically exactly where the tree is. I kind of wanted it to delete points that are just a little bit farther away from the tree. So sometimes, you know, you can have a point that's like really close to it. It's technically not inside it, but it's right there. Sometimes it kind of confuses the pop net a little bit and kind of makes things behave and flicker a little weirdly. At least that's what was happening when I was doing it. So I found that if I just put down a peak SOP right here, what a peak SOP does is it takes your geometry and allows you to expand it or contract it. So I only need to expand it a little bit. Let's go 0.017. So it's just a little bit farther out. So here is before, after, before, after. So I want it just to be a little bit bigger than the tree itself so that it deletes points just a little bit farther away from the surface. Okay, now let's try it. Let's see what that does. Save it. Much better. See how we're not getting all these weird points that are sort of spawning up here and sliding across the surface. It just helps it operate a lot better. So it's fine. So that seems to be working just fine. Okay, so let's talk about how to instance things on here now. So right now we've got this copy to points going and it's working, but it's really heavy. My Viewport performance is not great. It starts to cull out the ones in the back because it's getting heavy, and it's going to take a long time for your Redshift render viewport to like even fire up. At least it did for me. So there's a better way to do this. And instead of using variants and a copy to points and these things, we are going to use the instances. So first thing we're going to need, it works almost the same as variants, but instead of creating a variant attribute and then randomizing that attribute, let's first turn these off. Let's turn off this copy to points too. Okay, we're going to create attribute create. Let's name it variant. Or sorry, let's name it instance. So we create an attribute. It's called instance, and it's going to be a it is a point in attribute, but instead of a float, it's a string. Okay, so we're going to call this instance. Okay, and then inside this little string thing, you have to put the object you're trying to instance. Now, it works a little differently. We can't just grab one of these and put it in there. The objects you're trying to instance have to be at the object level in their own container. So let's just grab this platonic solid. Let's grab a torus. Let's copy it. Go up. Create a geonode. We'll call this, oops, torus. Go in there, throw this. Great. Okay, so that's our torus that we're going to instance. So what we'll do is, oops, let's just copy this. Just hit it, Control C, copy, and then come in here and go to our instance and paste it. So that is how you set up the instance attribute. Okay. So let's just make sure this is working before we randomize anything. So let's put the render flag there. Let's head up. There's a second thing you need, and that is an instance object. So you have to do this at the object level. It's called instance. And what it's looking for is it needs the points that you want to instance it to, and then it should work. So basically what we'll need to do, first maybe let's put a null down here. And we'll call this out points. Head up, go inside the instance, And by default, it gives you this add node with one single point. I don't know if you can see it there, just one point at the center where you're going to instance. So we can just delete that, and we're going to put in an object merge, and we're going to merge in those points we just made. So that would be under the particle sim, it's out points. So cool. There, got all our points. Great. Then, under the Redshift object tag, under instancing, change this to Redshift Instances. And let's turn off the particle sim. Let's turn off the torus, I think. No, let's leave it on. Or I guess we can turn it off because it'll be instancing it. And the tree stump collider, we can turn that off. So let's just see what that looks like. Let's fire up Redshift. See how that works. Maybe I need a light. Let's just put in a dome light with nothing in it so we can see if that works. No, it's not working. Interesting. I must be forgetting something. Okay, I found it. Found the problem here. On my instance attribute, I misspelled it. So you got to make sure that you can spell. So let's try that. Let's go up again. Let's turn off this torus, and let's refresh this, and that should be working. There we go. Okay, so we've got our instances. Now I have a dome light in here, just blasting light. Let's turn that down. Well, let's do like 0.2. But you can see it's working. Pretty cool, right? And I can actually, I think I can move around my viewport fairly easily, and it updates pretty quickly. So if I had my Redshift viewer on and we were using the copy to points, I wouldn't really be able to move around as easily like that. Now this takes a while to update. I think there's something in the settings we can change to do that. Let's turn that off. Let's go to the out context, highlight our ROP here, and I think in the IPR, if we go down to update live SOP level updates, let's try that. I think that'll allow you to sort of pan around and orbit and things and have it do it much faster in the viewport. Okay, it takes a second to kind of get started. It's a shitload of instances with a lot of geo on there. But okay, there it is. Cool. Let's just move and see if that updates faster. Maybe it won't. Maybe it won't help. That usually helps, but maybe not. Maybe it's just a lot of instances. Okay, so that's fine. It's working for now. That's great. But how do we instance multiple things on there? So let's do that. So what I want to do is I instanced some moss, I instanced some mushrooms, I instanced, I think, a cactus, but you can do whatever you want. But for now, let's just instance those three other things. So let's grab a platonic, go up, let's just copy this, and we will delete it, paste in the platonic, the soccer ball, and we'll call this soccer. And then we'll copy that here, go back here, and we'll grab the box. Oops, we want the box bend and the transform. And we'll call this one pyramid. Delete the soccer ball, paste those in. Cool. Okay, so what we want to do is we need to now randomize the instance. So right now we've got this instance attribute that's pointing to only the torus. So now, oh damn it, why do I keep doing that? By the way, to set quick marks like I'm doing, if you hover over, if you just go to the context you want and hit Control 1, that sets quick mark. So now whenever I hit 1, it'll bring me there. And if I go to the material context and hit Control 2, now if I hit 1, it goes back here. If I hit 2, it goes back here. And then I like to go to my out context and hit Control 3. So if I go 2, it's here, 3 is there, 1 is there. It's just an easy way to set little marks there. So nice. So okay, so we want to go back into our particle sim here, and we want to put down an attribute randomize. So instead of randomizing color, we want to randomize instance. And instead of using uniform, I found one of the best ways to do it is to use this one called custom discrete, which basically allows you to define the percentage of chance that it has to be in here. So instead of a float, it's a string. And let's once you change it to string, it gives you these slots here to put in your string path. So what you need to do, I like to just pin this, go up, and then we can grab the torus and just drop it in there. Grab the soccer, whoop, come on, grab the soccer ball, put it in there, and grab the pyramid, put it in there. And you can put as many as you want. You can just keep adding more. So we've got 3, and right now they're all weighted at 100%, which is 1, meaning they all 3 have an equal chance of appearing randomly in here. So let's just kind of zoom out a bit, or zoom in maybe, something like that. Save it, and let's pull up the Redshift viewer. And let's, okay, it's going. And that looks like it's working. Great. So I can zoom in, you can see there's soccer balls, there's toruses, there's a pyramid. They're just kind of small. Cool. Let's turn that off for now. Now, another thing that's pretty cool about using instances here is on this instance object, right now I have this set. Oh, I need to unpin this. So on this instance object, I have instance using, let's see, it's lights instancing. Gosh, where is it? Yes, here we go. So instead of on the Redshift object tag on the instance, I need to actually go to the instance objects itself parameters. And instead of using off, you can change this to full point instancing. So that what that's going to do is it'll show you a rough approximation of the objects right there. So that's pretty cool, right? And you still have pretty great viewport performance, especially compared to that copy the points SOP. And then you can change it to fast points instancing. I think that gives you, let's see what it does. I think it's actually maybe faster. I don't know. I'm not sure what the difference is between the two of them. But the nice thing is you can now play this or do a play blast or whatever. I haven't cached these points, so it's going to run a little slow. But you can see I could do a flip book or something and actually see the motion of them moving instead of having to try to guess how they're oriented with based on just the points. Oh, come on. Okay, but for now, I'm going to change it back to off because it's much faster viewport performance with the points. Okay, so we've got a soccer ball, a torus, a pyramid. That's great, but let's make it look way cooler than that. Let's put some moss in there. Let's put some mushrooms. I'll show you guys how to do that. So let's put down a geo, and let's call it moss. Now let's change it to pink so that I know it's something I'm actually going to use. So that I like to kind of color code things. So let's move the camera and the light dome kind of over here. Particle sim, anything that's simulated, I make it green. Anything I'm actually going to render at the end, let's make that red. Cool. And then these are going to be like my just other object thing. Let's make it this pink. I like that better. So these are things I'm instancing. So let's call it moss, and we're going to put down a grid. And let's see, that's fine. Let's put down a UV texture. So that will give it UVs. turn that on. So if I toggle this on and off, I can see the UVs. So great, it's got UVs, cool. And then we're going to put down an attribute from map. And I'll show you why I'm doing this. So the moss itself, the moss is just a, I think it's called a billboard or an atlas. That's how they give it to you with Megascans. If you ever used Megascans, you're probably familiar with it. So let's do, it's texture map here. Let's go find it. So it would be, let's see, it's my D Dropbox, Megascans, and then I think it's called peat moss. I like that one. So if you go on Megascans and you search for peat moss, you'll be able to find this. And what I want to bring in for this example here is just the opacity. So what that's going to do is, well, I don't have enough rows and columns here. Let's go 100, 100. So you're not going to see anything unless you have a lot of subdivisions in the viewport here. So if I change it to like 1,000 and 1,000, it's showing me how my texture is mapping. So with Megascans, they give you this basically big flat sheet full of assets that you then have to cut out yourself individually. And in Cinema 4D, that was kind of tedious and hard, but Houdini actually makes it really, really easy. So I'm going to show you how to do it. All you have to do is come over here and let's pick one we want. Let's say, I like to try to pick the like bigger, fluffier ones because they take up more space. So if I hit S on the keyboard, and I think it's, if I hover that S4, so I hit S4. Whoa. What have I done? Spacebar 1, take me back. So S4. God, whatever. So that'll give you the ability to sort of pick primitives. So you want it to be in this little primitive mode here. But instead of being in this little square drawing mode, let's go with the lasso. That makes it very easy. So let's just kind of hover over this and draw a line sort of as close to the area that you want without actually intersecting it. Okay? And then if you just hit delete on the keyboard, it blasts it away. And we'll come over to this blast and hit delete non-selected. Cool. Pretty great, right? And then all I do is, let's put down a match size. So that brings it back to the 000 mark in the center of our scene. Now I don't want that many polygons, right? That's way too many to instance. We don't need that. I only needed to do that so that I have this visualization with the attribute from map so I can actually see what I'm doing. But after the fact, we can put down a poly reduce, and we can reduce that a lot. So let's reduce it down to like 4%. So now the texture really isn't going to show up properly in the viewport, but once we actually put the texture on in Redshift, it'll be just fine. So this whole like adding 1,000 divisions was really only so we can see what we're doing here when we sort of laser out the ones we want. Okay, so that's great. So we've got this. Let's put down a null, and we'll call that out. Okay, so that's moss. Now let's make another one, because remember, anything we instance has to be, each object has to be inside its own container here. You can't just have multiple things in here, at least not that I know of. You can't have multiple things in here and instance them that way. They have to have their own object, and the texture has to be on, the material needs to be on the object itself. So we'll call this moss1. We'll go back in here. We'll go to the attribute from map, and instead of lasering out, what did we do? We did that one there. Instead of lasering that out, let's just come pick another one. Let's do this one here. So again, hit S on the keyboard, and then just sort of draw that. Okay. Oh, why is that not working? There we go. Got to make sure you're highlighting the node that you want to be on. Okay, hit delete again, and then just shake this loose, bring it over here, hit delete non-selected, and then we can remove this old blast and then just kind of put this back into the hierarchy here. And again, it'll just poly reduce it. It'll match size so it goes back to the center. And now we've put the render flag here. We've now got two different objects, right? So if we turn off the instances, we've got Moss1 and Moss2, or Moss and Moss1, whatever. Okay, so I'm not going to make you watch me do all of those. I did like, just pick like 8 of them, 8 different random ones, and laser them out and put them in there like that. And then I'll show you how to texture them here in a sec. So then let's do a mushroom next. So we're going to put down another geo. We'll color it pink. We're going to call this mushroom. Okay. And I know my mushroom is an FBX, so unfortunately I have to do that stupid agent thing. I don't know why you can't do it with a file mode. Or at least maybe I can't figure it out. So we'll go back here. We'll go pick our mushroom. So it's going to be, I think that's in my 3D assets, models. I think it's in plants. And it was mushrooms. And then it's these spotted red mushrooms. I think I got these from Megascans as well, spotted red mushrooms. So let's do, which one do I want? Let's do level of detail 0 again. Okay, and then we want to convert it. So if I don't convert it, it just stays as an FBX. I guess that doesn't matter. But let's just, maybe I don't need to convert. So let's take our agent, hit S on the keyboard. Oh, yeah, so that's why I converted it. So I can't really select one. They're all like one object. Maybe there's a way to do it, but easy way to get around it. There's probably a way to do it to select it as an FBX, but if I just convert it to polygons, now when I hit S on the keyboard and select things, it kind of automatically knows that these are separate objects. So there's a whole bunch of mushrooms in the same spot. I don't want all of them. I just want this one here. So if I just take this, click it, hit delete, and again go delete non-selected, now I have my one mushroom. Pretty great, right? And then let's see, I'll append a transform node at the end, just because I might want to scale this up. I'll bring it up to 3 or something. I don't know. We can always scale it down later. Null out. Cool. So now we've got our mushroom. Great. Okay. Let's do one more. Let's do something else. Let's do some aloe. So let's copy this. We'll call it aloe. Instead of this agent, we'll just change this to, let's see, I think it's still in plants, aloe vera. Let's try this one here. Great, I've got my aloe vera. And let's see, let's bring this to like 0.7. Doesn't need to be that big. We don't need this blast node because there's only one. So okay, we've got our aloe vera. So let's try this out. So now that we have these, let's delete all this crap. Let's go back to our particle sim. Or let's grab moss here, copy it. Let's go back to our particle sim, go to our instance. Instead of torus, make sure that that's moss because I just deleted the torus. Let's pin this, hit this guy here. Sorry, don't pin that. Let's hover over the attribute randomize, pin it, then come up and change this to moss, moss1, mushroom, aloe. Okay, now we can turn all these off. We don't need to see them in our viewport. We're not rendering them. We're just rendering the instances. So let's see, let's save it in case my computer explodes while I'm firing this up. Let's get in a little closer so we can actually see what we're doing. Great, it appears to be working. So lots of little stuff. So I may want to bump up the scale of my objects, and I can do that. I could do that in a few ways. I could actually go into each object and scale them up with a transform, or I could I could change the P scale. So let's just do that. So let's go go to my instances here, and let's just go to, oh, I have to unpin this. That's right. I always forget that I pin things. Let's change this to full point instancing so that it shows up. Give it a second. Okay, there's all my stuff. It's working. Some of them seem kind of small. It's fine. Particle sim. So the P scale, let's change this so that this one here, instead of going to 0.05, it goes to 0.3. So they start from 0, they grow up to 0.3, and then they go down. Because before I had it at 0.05, which worked for the scale of these, but I'm changing it now, making it a little bigger so that these all show up right. So give it a sec. It should populate. There. That seems a little better. It's a little bigger. Now, one other thing is, in order for things to orient themselves in the direction that you want them to, so see how everything is sort of facing the way that the velocity is moving it? In order for that to work properly, things need to be facing in the z plus direction. So right now this mushroom is facing in the y plus direction. So I need to actually rotate it 90 degrees so that it's like that. Now let's check the moss. Oh, I gotta turn off the, let's go to moss. So the moss should be fine because it is facing in the z direction. Great, that's totally fine. But that mushroom, you may need to do it, and the aloe, you probably have to do it too. So let's go back in here. Yeah, so with this, we'll just come over and we'll rotate it so that it's facing in this direction. I mean, it doesn't matter that much. It could be fine the way that you had it before, but this way, this now this Houdini knows that these tips here equals forward. So whenever it's moving facing its velocity, this will be the edge that's heading forward. Okay, so we've got that. And let me turn off this fast point instancing thing because it's forcing my viewport to be kind of slow. But let's go to this and just change it to off. That'll be a little faster. So let's start texturing some stuff. So let's start with, I suppose let's start with the moss. So let me turn off instances. Let me turn off this tree stump. Let me just turn on this single moss here. Just get it nice and close. And let's hit 2 on the keyboard because we set a quick mark for the material. I've already built a moss material here from a previous lesson, but let me just rebuild a new one and I'll show you how to do it. So let's put down an RS material builder and let's call it moss 2. Okay, and these are really easy. I'm not really doing anything super special. We just put in a texture and let's bring in let's go to our moss material that was in Megascans. It was peat moss. Here. Okay, so let's bring in our albedo, which is going to be our diffuse material. So that goes into diffuse color. Let's bring that down. Okay, and this needs to be the color space. You have to change it to sRGB. So there. Okay, let's copy that. This one will be our roughness, and those need to be utility raw. I don't know why they give you so many options here. It's kind of a hassle to have to do that every time. I think if you're using a later version or a newer version of Redshift, they've kind of made that list a little bit better. Because in Cinema 4D, there's only like 3 options or a few options. This one, it's kind of a hassle to have to scroll every time. But let's put this into the reflection roughness. Okay, and then let's bring this down again. And let's go to the normal. And again, it needs to be raw. Another stupid thing is that it doesn't, when you copy it, it defaults back to aces. It needs to be utility raw. And then let's put down a bump map. make sure this is to change to normal because it's a normal map. Put it into input, and then we'll go overall bump. Okay, great. Let's do the next. So that would be, let's just grab this. We want translucency. Okay, so that's going to go, actually let's go up here with that. Let's put that into the translucency color, and then let's change the translucency weight here to be a little more. And this needs to be sRGB. Basically anything with color, like diffuse materials or translucency or anything, those need to be sRGB in order for ACEs to work properly. And then for your informational things like roughness, anything that's like black and white that determines like bump or normal or displacement or roughness, anything like that, those need to be raw. So bump, roughness, displacement, normal maps, those should all be raw. It's an easy way to remember it. Okay, and then I think we need, let's put displacement on here. Let's get this JPEG here. And again, it needs to be raw. Output, utility, raw, and then put down displacement. Throw that into the texture map, and then that goes out to the displacement there. And then let's make sure our displacement is ranged set from -1 to 1 so that it displaces downwards and upwards equally, not just upwards. Okay, and then finally, we're going to need our opacity. So one thing though, so we could bring in a texture here and bring in our opacity, and you could plug it into overall opacity color. However, that tends to, when you have hundreds or thousands of instances that are all using opacity, it tends to get really slow or it doesn't work properly. So there's a better way to do it. Instead of using that, we're going to use a sprite node, RS sprite, and that attaches between the material and the output here. So let's put that there. And all you do is just put your opacity in the texture and then make sure that it's raw. Utility raw. That's it. Works the exact same way as an opacity, but just using the sprite node, for whatever reason, tends to work a lot better with instances. So let's fire up the viewport here, and let's see what we've got. Let me get in really close here so we can actually see this thing. We have nothing. Interesting. Oh, of course, because I have not applied that material. So we need to actually apply the material. So let's go back to our moss, and you can just click it and drag it onto, well, we just copy it, go back to 1 and make sure I'm doing this right. Make sure you put it in the material there. So that should, there. Why is it so far away? There. So that's what it looks like. Cool. So I'm not going to make you watch me do this for every single moss. I'll skip on to something later that I've already prepared. But basically, you do the same thing for the mushroom. You do the same thing for the aloe. The materials from Megascans are very easy. You plug in. You plug the albedo into the diffuse, the roughness into the roughness, the translucency color into the translucency color, the normal into the bump. And all I've done here for the aloe one is I've just used a color correction between the albedo and the diffuse, and I can just kind of swing the hue around to be whatever color I want. That's pretty much what I'm doing here. But otherwise, I'm leaving everything pretty much at default. Okay, so we would also need one for the tree as well, but again, that's the same thing. I'm just taking the textures straight from Megascans, plugging them into their respective ports. I'm not really doing anything special. I'm doing exactly like I showed you with the moss. That's really all it is. So here is a scene that I prepared earlier, so you don't have to watch me texture everything and take forever. I've got a bunch of different moss. Fortunately, you can use the same moss texture on all of these guys here. I've got some aloe, I've got mushroom. I don't think I'm using this Taurus. I'm just going to get rid of that. So these are all my instanced objects here. One thing I forgot to mention is on the objects here, since we did, so in the moss, since we do have displacement here, one thing on your moss objects under the Redshift object tag under tessellation displacement, you will need to enable displacement. And I just put mine at 1 and 0.5. Normally when you do displacement, you would enable tessellation as well, which is like subdividing, but we're using instances, so subdivision doesn't really work that way unless you set the minimum edge length to 0, which gets really, really heavy. And there's a bunch of these things. We're not really going to see that close, so we don't need to be tessellated. But I did notice a difference with displacement a little bit. It just kind of warps the shape of the moss pieces a little bit, so they're not, because otherwise it's just a flat plane, and I want it to be a little bit more than that. So put the displacement on the ones that you want it. Otherwise, leave it off. It's up to you. Okay, so then back in our sim here, it's exactly the same, although I did put down a file cache. So you want to make sure after you put down your instancing and everything, you get it all ready, you put a file cache down. One thing to note, let's come back up here. One thing I didn't go over was in the attribute randomize here, you can change the weights. So I've got all my moss and my aloe and everything in here, and in the previous file, everything was set to a weight of 1, which means they all have a 100% chance of being randomized. But you can lower that. So for this, for instance here, this aloe, I didn't want it to be as prevalent here as the moss. I want it to be mostly moss with a few pieces of aloe and some mushrooms. So I just lowered it. So now it only has a 15% chance of showing up. And the mushroom only has a 35% chance of showing up. So it's really nice. You can just kind of drag it around. It's a handy way to randomize things more according to your liking. So that's all I did. And then I cached it out. I did frame 72 to 216. I like to give it, here, I like to kind of get past the part where it's sort of building up and just skip to where there's already a bunch of particles. So I'm just going to kind of pick it up at frame 72. I don't really need to watch them being born. I just want them to already be there. So with those caveats being said, let's see what this looks like. So first we'll need a light. So let's put down a sunlight and put that down. And then let's just kind of position a camera, or position something like here. And let's go Redshift, open render view. Okay, come on. Usually just takes a minute to get going. I'm also recording this, so it kind of makes my viewport slower. So let's make sure this is on fixed scaling. Let's actually bring this down to 50%. So that should help it render a little faster. So cool, it's looking good. It's about where I want it. So I've got the light there. So with this sunlight, let's adjust it here a little bit. Let's bring this over here. I'm used to using 2 screens, so I usually have this like off on another screen. So if we hit enter on the keyboard over the sunlight, and then we hit, if you hit M on the keyboard, it actually toggles through world axis or local axis. So I like using the world axis here and just kind of like moving stuff around. Let's go to like somewhere around there, and let's do like hit M again, go back to the local axis. I don't know, go like that. I don't know, let's dial this in. Let's go -13, 28.3, and 0. Okay. And then that's cool. So that's our sunlight because it's outdoors. We're going to want some fill light a little bit. But let's put down a camera first. Let's go camera. And let me just turn this off for the time being. And the camera is should be at the dead center. Let's build a little rig here. Let's attach this null to the camera, and the camera. Let's bring it. Let's go inside of it here. So it'd be cam 2. Let's bring it back on the Z. Something like this. And this null, let me actually get out of the camera here. I'll show you what's happening. So you can see our camera here. So with this null, it allows me to kind of tilt it up and down. I can swivel it left and right. It's an easy way to sort of point it at a target. So with the null, let's point it like this, kind of over here. Let's go into our camera. Something like that. And then with our camera, we can just zoom out a bit. I don't know. So something like that. I don't know. And then basically we can take this and we can scrub this to frame 72, and with the null we can make sure we're in our camera. Cam 2. Let's make sure we lock it. Something like that. Take our null. Unlock here. I'm still not super great at positioning cameras in Houdini. I'm still so much more comfortable in Cinema 4D. So cameras and light work, I'm not nearly as fast as I am in Cinema 4D. So please bear with me. Sorry. Cool. So something like that. And we can just take our null and we can rotate it like this. So let's do that. So let's do like from frame 72, something like this. And we'll go to frame, where is their last frame? 216. Rotate it over here. Something like that. Drop a keyframe. So now our camera moves. And if we hit shift click on here, hit H on the keyboard to center it all up, highlight these both, and then make it linear. So if the camera just kind of linearly travels across like this. Okay, so cool. There it is. Now let's add in, let's turn our camera back on. Come on. Okay, cool. Let's lock that to camera 2 so that I can, I can pull out of the camera and fly around and adjust our lights here. So let's grab another light here. Let's go light. Oops, no, we want an RS light. RS light. Okay, and the same thing, I want to parent it to a null. And I want this to be, let's see, we'll take this guy here. And I'm just kind of dialing these in based on something I've done before. So let's put this back to like 5. So it's way back here in the Z direction. And let's rotate it. Let's tilt it down a little bit. Something like minus 30. Okay, and then let's take this null and let's rotate it. Let's go minus 24, so it's a little higher. Let's go minus 98 and 16. So now it's kind of over here. Okay, great. And let's maybe adjust the power here and play around with it. But basically, that's all I'm doing is I have a sunlight and I have a fill light, and I take the fill light and I just kind of swivel it around and position it and get my tree positioned the way I want it to be. So let me pause this here. Let me take these guys here. I'll just show you kind of what I prepared instead of having you go through exactly all the details here. I'll just show you where I ended up. So let me just delete this stuff, come over to my prepared stuff. Let's turn it all back on. So I've got a null, a camera, a null, a light. So I've got my sun and I've got two lights in the same position. So let me go into my camera here. So there's my camera. It's animated. Cool. So let's flip this back on. Actually, first let me make sure I turn the lights all back on. They're on. On. Great. So what I've done, I've got two lights and they're in the exact same position. So I found that one light, I wanted to have one light for the tree and one light for the moss and have it sort of affect them a little bit differently but be in the same spot. So let's let this fire up here. There we go. Cool. So let me lock this to my camera and let's get out of the camera here. So you can see what I've got. I've got my sunlight, which is sort of the main light here. Let me just turn that off. Okay. And then I've got my one called RS light tree and one called RS light not tree. So let's start with, let's turn off this one and just go with RS light not tree. So basically this light here is affecting only the meadow part, but not the tree. And the way that you do that, if you don't know, is if you go to the objects tab of your tree, there's enable light mesh associations. All I did was I grabbed this stump collider. So if I put the stump collider in there, it's only going to affect the stump. But if I put a star, it's going to affect everything in the scene. But if I go like this, I put star and then this little caret, which means except. So the star is everything. So it affects everything in the scene except for the collider. Cool. And then conversely, if I turn this guy off and turn back on the tree, this one's the opposite. It's just only enabled for the stump. So the reason I did that was because if you look, the light intensity for the meadow, I've got it at 3, and the light intensity for the tree, I've got it at 20. I wanted it to be much higher because 3 just wasn't enough for me. Okay, and then I've got the sun. I turn that on, and that is pretty much it. So I've got my camera animating around it. It just kind of swivels around, and then I have the light. The light's not animated or anything. So let's talk about how we can do some render settings here and get this rendered out, and I'll show you briefly how I composited it as well. There's not much to it, but okay. So great, there's that. Let's go to our render settings. So if we hit quick mark 3 that we set up, if you don't have that set up, you can just go to the out tab and it brings you to your ROP area. So what I want to do is, so let's define an output here. So we go to main, make sure our camera is linked, so it's camera 1 is what's going to render, right? And then output and common, this is where you define where it's going to go. So I changed mine. The default is EXR. I changed mine to PNG. I like working with PNGs for my beauty passes anyway. So basically, you just want to make sure that you have at least this part, the hip name OS F4. Otherwise, if you don't have the $F4, it's not going to render all your frames. But just hit this, navigate to where you want it to go, make sure you name your file with the F4 and all that stuff. So cool, I've got it there. Great. So for the AOVs, the things that you're going to want are translucency. I like to have a crypto matte, specular lighting, and Z depth. So the way that you make a new AOV, you just hit this little plus sign, and let's also add in motion vectors. So just select what you want. There it is. And then under the common, you can define what type of file your AOV is going to be. So I want this to be a PNG. There. Okay. So translucency filter, I've also made that a PNG. The crypto matte has to be an EXR or else it won't work. So make sure that's an EXR. Specular lighting, I like that to be a PNG. And then the Z depth, make sure that's an OpenEXR with 32 bits instead of 16. So for this, you can do depth of field in Redshift, and you can do motion blur in Redshift and render it all out. But this is already a pretty hefty render anyway. So I'm leaving off motion blur and I'm leaving off depth of field, and I'm going to do that in composite. And the way I'll show you how to do it with, you can use Z depth and you can use motion vectors to create your own, and it'll render a lot faster that way. So great, I've got that. Now, one thing, this is actually kind of a question for you guys. If there's any Houdini users in here, Houdini Redshift users that know the answer to this, please let me know. When I'm using Cinema 4D, I can define a specific path for my AOVs using the $pass token, and it'll automatically create folders for each one of my own motion vectors. So all my motion vector sequences will have its own folder, my translucency filters will have its own folder, and so on and so on. I don't know how to do that in Houdini. Right now it's just dumping everything all in one big folder. It's super disorganized. It's not the end of the world, but I really liked being able to have a way to put everything in their own respective folders. So if you know how to do that, somebody please tell me. Cool. The next thing I like to do in post effects, these are not on by default. So if you don't put those on by default, or if you leave it at the default, your render is not gonna look like what your viewport is, because it's now using the ACES workflow. So if you want to, it'll render it out, making it look more, it'll look like washed out and crappy, which technically is the quote unquote correct way to do it if you ask like a Houdini VFX artist. But I'm not a Houdini VFX artist. I'm a motion designer. I cheat and I want things to be the way that I want them. I'm not working in some crazy production pipeline. It's just me, and I can do whatever I want. So I like my render to look exactly like my viewport. So the way you do that is just make sure you turn on the color LUT controls. Okay. Under Redshift, under sampling, I'm going to leave this pretty low. I'm just going to change the max samples to 256 and the min at 64. If you want to do automatic sampling, great. It's going to look nice, but it's probably going to take a while. This gives me a pretty decent looking render, 256 and 64. If you wanted it to go higher, you could do 512 and 128. That's pretty nice. I'm going to leave it at 256 and 64 for now. I don't have any sampling overrides or anything like that. This isn't really a rendering tutorial. This is just kind of showing you what I did for this. Make sure motion blur is enabled with instances and particle blur on. If you have it enabled and you have your AOVs set with motion vectors, your motion vector, if you don't enable it, it's really weird. If you don't enable motion blur and then you put an AOV with motion vectors on, it will render motion blur into your beauty pass, which is kind of counterintuitive. But if you have enabled motion blur and you have motion vectors as an AOV, the motion blur will not render into your beauty pass, which is what we want. Okay, under globals, I always make sure I check this hardware ray tracing, make sure it's on. If you've got NVIDIA GPUs with RTX technology, then it will render like twice as fast if you have that. Global illumination, I left at the default. That's pretty much it. So once I have that, I think you go to your output here, make sure that you render the frame range that you want. So mine's 72 to 216. That's where my camera is animated. And then when you're ready, you just hit render to disk. Here we are in After Effects, and I've only rendered out a few frames. I didn't need to do the whole thing just to show you how to composite, but I've got all my sequences imported here. So I'll just kind of quickly show you what I did. So let me take my main beauty pass, hit play, so you can see it there. There's no motion blur, there's no depth of field, but it rendered pretty quickly. It only took like a minute and a half per frame. I probably could have cranked the samples up a little more. I know for my actual final nature piece, I cranked the samples up higher, but just for the sake of this tutorial, I just wanted to get out a quick render just to show you what to do. So first things first, let's start with motion blur. So to do that, you're going to need your V pass here, which was the motion vectors, and it looks like this. It's kind of cool. So the way you use it is I have a plugin called Real Smart Motion Blur. So you can find that, let's see, Real Smart, it's spelled like R-E-E-L, Real Smart Motion Blur. It's under Revision Effects. It's a pretty cheap plugin. I think it's like $50 or something like that, but I highly encourage you to get it. When you render things without motion blur, it renders quicker and it gives you a lot more control in compositing. So let me show you. So let's put down a new adjustment layer, put down RSMB, Real Smart Motion Blur Pro Vectors. Let's call this RSMB. Okay. And then what you do is for the motion vectors, just put in your motion pass. And there you have it, motion blur. Pretty cool, right? Now the great thing is you have control over this, so that is way too much. So let's bring this down to like 0.1. Let's see. But it's nice because you have control after the fact. You can always, you can keyframe it up, you can keyframe it down. Maybe let's do like 0.2. It's better. I don't know. I think 0.1's fine. But you can put whatever you want in there. Cool. So there's your motion blur. That's great. The other reason I like doing motion blur in compositing is because it allows me to use my mattes a lot better. So let me show you my crypto matte here. Let's pull that in here. And it shows up as nothing. But if you put in the crypto matte effect onto it, suddenly you have this. So instead of using, this is a great alternative to puzzle mats. I prefer it to puzzle mats because with puzzle mats, you have to put in the Redshift object tag, or you have to define each object as its own puzzle mat number. Whereas with a crypto mat, you don't need to worry about that. You just put the plugin, or you just put the AOV on for crypto mat, and it automatically gives you a separate color for every object in your scene, which is really nice. And then what I can do is I can just click them individually. So all the mushrooms have one item, all the moss has another item, all the other stuff. So let's see, let's find, let me see here, what do I want to get? I want to grab my aloe, that like blue thing there. So let's turn this back on. There, I've got all my aloe. Then under colors, switch it to matte only, and suddenly you've got yourself a Luma matte, right? Pretty cool. So let's make a new adjustment layer. Let's do hue saturation, set the track matte to Luma matte, and suddenly I'm able to have control over the color of just my aloe. Pretty cool, right? So that's nice. I can make it something, I don't know, whatever I want. But I can do that for anything. If I want to make a new matte, I can just duplicate this crypto matte and hit reset. Make it for, say, the mushrooms. And let's hit matte only. And same thing. Hue saturation. Luma matte, and then I can change the color of my mushrooms to be whatever I want. Pretty cool, right? So the nice thing about that is if you have depth of field or motion blur baked into your render and you're not doing it in compositing, it makes it really hard to isolate things that are out of focus or blurred out. Whereas this gives you nice control. You can perfectly select all the things you want to select, and then just put your motion blur above it and turn it on. And there you go. Pretty cool, right? So I think what I did, let me just show you what I actually did. Let me delete this. So I had mine changing in color. So let's just reset this. I'm going to select my stump, hit matte only, and then I want to change this from Luma matte to Luma inverted. So that way it selects everything except for the stump. And then I can just rotate this hue and it will change the color of everything else. So let's hit reset. So let's set a keyframe. It's here, and let's set one here for like that. So now when I hit play, everything changes color. Now obviously the one that I actually made is a lot longer than this, so I had it shift a lot more. But that's how I did it. I did it in composite like this. I prefer doing things, doing color changes like this in composite. You could certainly have done it in 3D and baked it out that way, but if you do it wrong or if you don't like it, then you have to re-render. Whereas with this, I can control it the way I want it to be, and if it's wrong, I can just change it in After Effects without having to re-render anything. So that's cool. Okay, let me turn my Real Smart Motion Blur back on. Now let's do depth of field. So that's going to help too. I guess I can turn this off. So the way you do that is with your depth pass, the Z pass. And again, I've got an EXR, and I want to put the extractor on there, and then under the layers, extract the Z, and then it turns white. And then with this white point, black point thing, you can kind of adjust here. Now it's really sensitive, so if you hold Control on the keyboard and then scroll, it makes it, you can scroll a smaller amount. So what I want to do is I'm trying to get it so that just the things at the very back are pure white, and then just the things at the very front are pure black. So just kind of adjust it till you get it. What is that? Something like that's 2. Let's try 1. Let's go 1.5. That's better. Something like that, okay? Now for this one, in order to do depth of field in After Effects, you're going to need a plugin called Frischluft Lens Care Depth of Field. So if I type in FL, see it's like Frischluft depth of field, and the plugin comes with two things: depth of field and out of focus. I'm actually going to make a tutorial completely separately on just how to use this plugin. It's very easy and it's very handy, but if I could recommend that you buy 2 plugins for After Effects, it would be Real Smart Motion Blur and the Frischluft plugin. So that way you can render things without motion blur and without depth of field. It makes compositing a lot easier, and it makes your renders go so much faster. So let's, on this Z pass, let's put down FL out of focus. And we're also going to need a vector blur. So for the out of focus, type in 2.8 for the radius. These are just numbers that I've found work pretty much every time. And I've just kind of memorized them. So 2.8, and then for the amount of vector blur, do -4. One thing I also forgot is this image needs to be inverted. So let's just invert. So in order for the depth of field plugin to work, the things that are the closest to you need to be white, and the things that are farthest away need to be black. Okay, so we've got that. Now we need to pre-compose this Z. So hit Control-Shift-C, call it DOF Matte, and make sure you move all attributes into new composition. This has to be pre-composed or else it won't work. Okay, and I turn it off. You don't actually need to see it. It's just for a matte. Now let's make a new adjustment layer, and we'll call this one DOF, depth of field, and then we're going to use the other Frischluft plugin, which is Frischluft depth of field. And then what you do is you change your depth layer to the DOF mat we just created, and then just crank up the radius. Let's go like 5. Let's do it, make it really obvious. Let's go like 10. Okay? And then you can use this little select depth thing to kind of just pick your focus. Pretty cool, right? So I want the log to be the focus. How about back here? Or you can just drag it around. And the nice thing is you can animate this too. So instead of having to do depth of field, I could animate a depth of field in 3D and then have it be wrong. You can just do it here. So let's go like 20, and then let's keyframe the radius and the focal point. So I'm going to have it start out back here, and then I'm going to have it move up here and also go down to like 5. So what's that look like? It's pretty nice. It really, really helps though. You can definitely do this with a Z that's a PNG, like a depth patch that's a PNG. But I've found that doing it as a EXR with 32 bits of color gives you way more accurate results. So there's that. I'm not going to actually animate that. Let's turn those off. I just wanted to show you how it works. So let's put this at like 5, and then I want the focal point to be the tree. Maybe I'll do 10. And then another thing you can do is highlight selection. So if you enable this, I don't know if you can see, it's not super apparent, but basically if you look at the background, the bokeh, they tend to get a little brighter. You can kind of see it on this tree edge here. It's not super apparent in this scene, but it makes the bokeh brighter. And you can increase the intensity of the highlights. Let's go like 5, 10, 1. So you can see it right here on this. If you look right here on this white edge, there's 1, there's 5. It makes the specular highlights sort of turn into more circular bokeh and more apparent. So make sure you put the motion blur under your DOF. That's how it works. You could always do, you can put it above it, but DOF is, in real life, it's on top of motion blur. So there is our shot. That's basically all I did. I think I probably added a LUT too. So if I use a new adjustment layer, do Lumetri color, I always do this. I name it CC for color correction. And then just in the creative tab, just come down and I just kind of flip through these till I find one that I like that looks nice. That's kind of nice. Cool. Maybe like, I don't know, Fuji C. Something that gives a nice look. I don't know, Kodak B Ultra Soft usually works pretty well. That's kind of dark and crushed a little bit. Blue Moon. That's pretty good. Blue Moon, maybe, I don't know, let's play with the temperature, make it a little warmer or something like that. I don't know, just play around with Lumetri color. It gives you a lot of options. You have curves, you've got nice stuff here. But that's essentially how I did it. So, if you guys, as always, if you have any questions, please leave it in the comments. I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can. Hopefully that, I know that my tutorials can be a little bit long-winded, but I'm hoping that I can simplify the process for you and explain how to use instances and mops, and that you understand it. So thanks, and I will see you in the next tutorial.